So welcome to this week's episode of Tolkien with Friends. Today we're excited to invite our friend Tim, who you may know as Glam Drink Fohammer on TikTok. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited. I love the show, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, of course we had to involve you. You're one of our greatest Tolkien friends on the interwebs and, you know, eventually real life, whenever that is able to happen. So now, Tim, before we jump into today's chapters, could you tell us and listeners a little bit more about like your introduction to Middle Earth?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I must have been 9 or 10 years old. So this is just before, like the year before the trilogy came out. My brother's best friend was an avid reader. Like he would escape into books as a kid. He didn't have the best life growing up, and he used to come over to our house every weekend, and he'd be like, "Hey, Tim, let me tell you the story about this character. Her name is Eowyn, and she's really badass." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." I loved, wizards and dragons and knights in shining armor, so I was super engaged right off the bat. And he used to draw pictures of the dwarves and the Hobbit and Gandalf, and I was immediately super enthralled into this world before I'd even picked up the book or seen anything on a screen. And when I finally got to go to see Fellowship of the Ring, my mind exploded. And I had my 11th birthday party at the movie theater with friends. And I was so sucked up into this. And I got for that birthday the trilogy and the Hobbit box set. And I read all of the books before the Two Towers came out. And my life completely changed forever. Here we are over 20 years later, and I'm still an avid reader, super into this. It consumes a lot of my spare time, and I still get so much enjoyment out of it. It's never lessened.
Yeah, it's wild how, I don't know, there's something, and like we talk in this podcast about the differences between the books and the movies, right? But there is, when examining them just like as themselves, I mean, they're literally magical. Like, not just like the world that they're in, but like what they were able to build, like both behind the scenes and on screen. I think, and just like seeing the actors together, like on and off, in and out of the story as well. I'm just like, everyone just seems like so legitimately cool that like you want to be a part of it, on top of the story being one of like the greatest of all time. So yeah, it's so many good memories with those movies, and will always hold a special place in our hearts.
Absolutely.
I feel like. Yeah. So awesome. So if we want to get started, today we're covering the chapters the Palantir and Minas Tirith, and also realized while just doing my research, but we're also essentially finishing the Journey to the Crossroads chapter in this section of the movie, and that would be the extended edition of Return of the King. And this part that we're talking about today, it starts at about like 18 and a half minutes in and ends at about minute 54, 55. So we go from, it's like the end of the Isengard situation for now, and then all the way to Pippin and Gandalf getting to Minas Tirith, and kind of settling down for what comes next. So now, like, super broadly speaking, I wouldn't say that that there are some parts that we've talked about where I'm like, ugh, this is just like pretty wrong in comparison to the book. But I wouldn't really say that about this part. Something like wrong, I mean, if you just watched it, you would know essentially what happens, right? Like, and there's a lot of similarities. I think it's one of those where there are just like a few tweaks made, and good and not bad, but different, I guess you could say. So we'll just, go through it kind of as the movie presents it, and then talk about it in that section in comparison to the book. So this part of the movie starts with our crew at Edoras, where they're having like a victory party after Helm's Deep. And now, like, there's nothing to compare this to because this doesn't happen. But it would actually, after Isengard, the story continues with them like just leaving Isengard, and there's like a camping scene where a lot of the stuff that is relevant to the books happens. But in the movie, they're at Edoras, Gimli and Legolas are having their drinking game. Merry and Pippin are dancing on a table. It's all like chill, fun vibes. And Theoden is kind of being a little sad Sally to Eowyn, where he's like, "I'm happy for you about Aragorn," and I'm like, "Wait, so you guys are just thinking this is happening? That Eowyn and Aragorn is a thing?" I don't think Aragorn has ever led Eowyn on, like,
No.
in any. So I don't know where I guess he's just like, well, she likes him, so I'm sure it'll work out. But he says a line where he's like, "It was not Theoden of Rohan that led, the victory at Helm's Deep," and I'm like, well, that's not fair. I'm like obviously, like in the movie, they gave Aragorn like a big part, but it is Theoden's idea to like ride out and kick the orcs' butt at the end. So I was like, sorry, Theoden.
Yeah, the movie did a good job of trying to make Theoden like I'm still not worthy enough. They really lean into that the entirety of his storyline all the way up until his completion of the story.
Yeah. They took that one line that he says to Saruman. They give it to Saruman in the movies where he's like, "I'm a lesser son of greater sires," or something. And they really are like, you know what? We're going to base all of Theoden's character around this one line. But, we stand Bernard Hill, and I do love Theoden in the movies. And, like, this movie is really where I think I really fell in love with Theoden. Just, like, so many... He just delivers everything so beautifully that I'm like, you can make him say whatever he wants. I'd be happy. So, but the main thing that happens at the Edoras scene is Pippin picking up the Palantir. And so that's kind of what I want to focus on. So in the book, this happens after like a day of riding away from Isengard with the plan to head back to Helm's Deep, like in the morning. And similar to the movies, everyone is sleeping, but Pippin can't stop thinking about the Palantir. So he, sneaks over to Gandalf, who is kind of sleeping with his eyes open, which is true. I think it's a little more unsettling in the movie, personally, because like the way
cracked open in the book, and he's just wide-eyed staring in the movie.
Yeah, because it's interesting because Tolkien specifically mentions being able to see his eyes like through his eyelashes. So obviously, like the lids are closed enough for the eyelashes to be covering the eye, but probably not as easy to do. It's probably easier for actors to have them totally open and more creepy. It's fine. So, and, Pippin does, in the book, he replaces the Palantir with a rock, and in the movie, that he does it with a jug, which I thought was cute. But, he does it, he kind of talks to Sauron, and that's not, like, wrong or anything. It's a little more dramatic in the movie. He like rides around. Aragorn has it for a second, and before Gandalf finally wakes up. Yeah, exactly. We're all kind of like, whoa, shit. But what I love about the location in the book is that there is a heightened sense of urgency. They've literally just left Isengard. Like, you know exactly where you've picked up from the story. There hasn't even been time to get back to Edoras or anywhere to have a party. But after Gandalf figures out what Pippin has said to Sauron, he immediately starts making plans for everyone to like quickly get to Helm's Deep at dawn. Like, they've already sent some people ahead, and everyone's planning to like get up and go real early. But then, and Ahnna, I think you'll really like this part. At that moment, a shadow fell over them. The bright moonlight seems to be suddenly cut off. Several of the riders cried out and crouched, holding their arms above their heads as if to ward off a blow from above. A blind fear and a deadly cold fell on them. Cowering, they looked up. A vast winged shape passed over the moon like a black cloud. It wheeled and went north, flying at a speed greater than any wind of Middle-earth. The stars fainted before it. It was gone. Gandalf cries out, Nazgul, the messenger of Mordor, the storm is coming. The Nazgul has crossed the river. Ride, ride, wait not for the dawn. You know, let not the swift wait for the slow. Ride. And so that's when he's like, Pippin, you're coming with me. And then they scoot off, and everyone else is kind of like, oh, shit, gets ready to go back to Helm's Deep. And I just love the visual of that, and I do like the whole situation of the Nazgul. Like, I know that we get it in Two Towers via Osgiliath in the movie, but I just really like that there's always this, like, it's a reminder that the power of the Nazgul isn't necessarily, like, what they do, but, like, the fear that they inspire is their greatest weapon. Like, they don't even have to, they just have to be around, and people just stop in their tracks, and it's like, that makes it easy to win in their situation. But there, they weren't looking for them. They were on a mission. And I believe that mission was to, they're obviously going to Isengard to talk to Saruman, but Tim, do you remember what it, like, because obviously Sauron hasn't had enough time to send a Nazgul to pick him up yet. This one is on a different mission. And I think is it because he's heard about the defeat at Helm's Deep?
I think it might have just been the fact that Saruman hasn't been talking to Sauron at this point, and Sauron and scenes like, I want to hear news right now. We were talking all of the time. Saruman would always have to answer his call, and all of a sudden he just stopped showing up. Gandalf says something like, it would have taken a few hours for a Nazgul to come in this short amount of time. This must have been an earlier messenger that was sent. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's like, and I get it as far as, like, pacing, like, they're trying to have kind of like a lull with the party, things are not too bad, and then pick it back up again with, like, the Palantir scene. And it's interesting, Mary's comments to Aragorn after the fact when Pippin is being taken away, they make it much more heartfelt in the movies.
Oh, way more heartfelt.
Like, in the book, he's just kind of like, well, some people have all the luck. He didn't want to sleep, and he wanted to ride with Gandalf, and now basically, like, his wish was granted.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have to sleep, and now he gets to question Gandalf all the way to wherever they're going.
Mary was surprised he didn't get punished for what he did. It's like, she turned him into stone and left him here as, like, a warning.
Yeah, and instead, he's just like, they're kind of showing Mary as, like, the more aware one, which isn't wrong, because later we'll see that when Pippin is questioning Gandalf on the way to Minas Tirith, and I think when he's telling him about Denethor, and Gandalf is like, we shouldn't talk about Aragorn because of, the kingship stuff, and he's like, kingship? And he's like, yeah, if you have walked all these days with your mind, what is it, your mind and your ears closed, or your mind asleep and your ears closed, wake up now. So I always thought that was, so it's like, it's not inaccurate to have Mary being the one that's, like, telling Pippin, hey, this isn't a vacay that you're going on, like,
even earlier in the chapter, you really get a glimpse that Mary has way more perception of what's going on, where he's like, I saw a change in Gandalf. He's much more powerful now. Pippin's kind of oblivious. Could be just, like, the temptation that he's going through at the time. All he can think about is the Palantir. But Mary has already shown that he's maturing a lot during this, and he is the one that is really the more wise, I guess I would say, of the two.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. So I did appreciate that change. I thought it was very sweet. And also, Gandalf's line to Shadowfax is, like, so much better in the movie, the ride Shadowfax, show us the meaning of haste, instead of just away Shadowfax away. And I'm like, how many times have I said show me the meaning of haste to like just randomly in conversation after that? Too many times. It's a great line. And the movie is really good at like making things that feel very Tolkien-y, but they're not. And sometimes doing things that are like totally off. But it's funny. It's funny those moments where it feels like, I don't know, like sometimes it's like, yes, that should have been in there. And other times it's like, no, you didn't need to deviate that much. But so we're gonna hear more about Merry and Pippin, or Pippin and Gandalf in a second. But at this point, when like during this time when it's flipping back and forth, there's a moment where Aragorn and Gandalf are talking about Frodo, and that in his they like there's no news of Frodo, and I'm like, well, where the heck would you get news about Frodo? You guys are like countries apart. There's no telephone. We've established this. The only way to communicate like that is with the Palantir. But with Gandalf, is like, in his heart, he feels that Frodo is alive, and he's like, yeah, okay, we're gonna go with that. And so that's when it like takes the opportunity to flip back and see more of what Frodo, Sam, and Gollum are doing. And really, I think that in the book, we really only have so far have only had one conversation with Gollum really talking to himself, and that was in the Dead Marshes. And in the book, and they've used that multiple times. Like they used that, when he's talking to himself after Osgiliath. They have, there's the larger scene, after the Black Gate, where he's in the movie, where he has that really, where he tells his bad self to go away, basically. And then we see it again here, and this one is pretty similar. And I feel like they all have like signs that point to that Dead Marshes conversation, like lines that they pull from that. Like we could have her do it, stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
And in this one version of it, he's kind of plotting again, but this time he's like much more explicit about wanting to actually kill Frodo and Sam. But this is the only time in the movie where Sam actually overhears him. But in the book, he kind of plays it cool. He doesn't let Gollum know that he hears him. And then he makes it out as if he just like wakes up casually and it's like, like what's going on, But here, Sam hears, Gollum making threats to himself about Frodo and Sam, and so he kind of attacks him. And the way that they have Frodo react, and it's like, I understand sometimes the new beta is like, acts like he hates Frodo, because the movie Frodo is so different, and it really starts to show up with the whole Gollum stuff. Whenever Gollum is around, Frodo is just so different in the movies. And for example, like the whole scene where Sam is like, dude, he is trying to murder us. Like, I heard it with my ears. I don't know how else to explain this to you. And Frodo's like, I need you on my side, Sam. And he's like, of course I'm on your side. Like, I am on your side, Mr. Frodo.
That's why I'm trying to keep you from dying.
Yes! And I'm just like, dang it, movie Frodo. Like, there's no question that Sam is on your side. And I get it. They're trying to make him a little bit more like, like the ring is gnawing at him and it's making him make bad decisions, I guess. But
they could have added something to make it work better in the movies if they just stressed the fact that Frodo swore on Gollum swore on the ring, and they used that thread, which they just kind of eliminate from Return of the King altogether.
Totally.
They could have had it where like Frodo really trusts in the strength of this bond, that the promise will be kept regardless. If they kind of put that in, it would have made a big difference in the believability of Frodo in those scenes. The Sam and Frodo relationship, Return of the King, just breaks my heart. I hate all of those early scenes, especially the go home. But that's not this episode.
No. But we reference it all the time because I know it's coming, and I know they're setting it up with scenes like this, and it's like Frodo would never. I just want everyone to know that Frodo would never. That's never Absolutely a question. Not. They hold hands through the tunnel of like Shelob's lair. We'll get there, but I'm just saying. I'm just saying. But yeah, I think that totally should have been like a through line that they explored more, because Frodo does, use that a lot of the time whenever Gollum is being, not very forthright. Frodo is like, you made a promise, and you made a promise on a thing that you probably shouldn't have. So, and it's going to hold you to it. And if I told you to like throw yourself off a cliff, you would right now because of your stupid promise. So don't play me. But they don't do that. They just make it out like, Frodo is just trying to, as if he's becoming more Gollumish because of the ring. Maybe not as trusting in Sam, and, trying to, like, focusing more on, like, saving Gollum.
Yeah, they really stress, like, his sympathy towards Gollum that you see in the Two Towers is really kind of translating into, I can really trust him because he actually understands what I'm feeling right now. Sam has no clue. He's just, at this point, he's just my gardener.
Yeah.
They really lost that kind of relationship that we know that they have.
Yeah, it's like, Frodo is leaning more and more on Gollum and less on Sam, and Sam is just kind of like left in the lurch. He's like third wheeling it in the movie at this point. But Sam has always, I don't know, Frodo doesn't ever become not Frodo until like the very end, and I think that demonstrates more about how the ring is working. Like here, like it is physically heavy, and he is not feeling great, but it's just not manipulating like his emotions in that way. But it's fine.
I think the movie really stresses that the corruption of the ring makes everybody turn to Gollum, where that's not the truth. Right. Everyone's effect is very different. Whereas, like you said, Frodo's character really hasn't changed towards the end, but even then, the way that he fails his mission is very Frodo, where he's like, it's very logical. I did this, I came this far, but you know what? I'm not going to finish the job. And Bilbo is very aloof all the way to the end. He's making jokes with Gandalf all the way until the point where he drops the ring.
Yep.
I don't think the ring turns everyone to Gollum. Gollum had, really nasty traits even before they found the ring. The way they describe he was all about kind of sneaking away and digging holes in the ground and trying to like get to the bottom of things. And he was very, very introverted and kind of selfish all the way from the beginning of his story.
Exactly. And that's something we talked about before. Like the way that Frodo and Bilbo come at the ring protects them in a way that it doesn't protect Gollum or even like Boromir, because he, from the outset, as soon as he knew what it was, he was like, we could use this. Like this could help us despite all the things that people are saying. Because he's just so, his main priority is Gondor and maybe his dad, pleasing his papa, and that affects him. And even Galadriel is like, I couldn't take it. I would ruin that too, like I would start out trying to heal the world, but this thing literally doesn't have the ability, or doesn't, it doesn't have, it's literally malice encased in a ring. I don't like, there's no way to make this thing a good thing, but it would have like a proportionate effect to whoever had it, so yeah, that is something that they, and I get simplifying the story to a point, but I think an easy fix totally would have been just having Frodo talk more about the promise that Gollum made.
Oh yeah.
So, and then, so we have that. Then kind of cut to Arwen, who is, it kind of implied that she's making a trip towards the Grey Havens. Like she's going to go take the ship to Valinor. And I totally forgot that was in this part of the movie. Mm-hmm. Like I knew it was there somewhere, but when I'm just like picking out which chapters go with which part of the movie, obviously Arwen's story doesn't make it in until the appendices. But all that to say, this doesn't really happen in the appendices either. This is just kind of building off of what they've done between Elrond and Aragorn and Arwen previously, mm-hmm. where it's this whole thing of. So I guess he did kind of convince her to go to Valinor, even though like they're already betrothed. They're in the book, version. Obviously in the book version, Aragorn's motivation is always to become king, but then adding Arwen to it is like a whole extra layer of like, well, I definitely have to become king so that I can marry my lady. So obviously this wouldn't happen, but for the movie purposes, they make it out like Elrond only reforges the sword now because, like, he gives in to, like, the whole Arwen and Aragorn being a thing because now Arwen, the life of the Eldar is leaving her and no ship could bear her to, the Undying Land. So he's like, okay, fine, we'll reforge the sword. But I do, I guess if they are going to do that with Aragorn's story, I kind of like having Arwen be the reason that the sword is reforged, because it is in Rivendell. We know from the movie point of view, it is in Rivendell still. It's not like he could call them and be like, hey, I actually do need my sword now. It kind of becomes a series of events that leads Aragorn to decide, like, I have to do this. Not because I necessarily want to be a leader, movie Aragorn. Not necessarily because he wants to be a leader, but because he knows it's the way to, like, save everybody's skin, and keep Middle-earth from being overtaken by Sauron. Because then this leads into later when he goes into the mountains and asks our ghosty boys to help us out, which we'll talk more about next time. But this is kind of a precursor to that because he needs that sword in order to do that. And also, weirdly, this is, I think, the only time we hear the Riddle of Strider in the movie. I don't think they say that not all that is gold does not glitter, but from the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring, renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the only time. I can't recall any other moment in the movie.
I know, and it's so funny because in Fellowship we hear it several times in the book, So it's definitely like a nice nod to the books and like here, book fans, we finally used it. And it Arwen reciting it is nice. I don't know how else they would have fit it in there, honestly, by the way that they've structured everything together. Could you guys think of another reason to put that poem in there?
To put the poem in? The crownless again shall be king, I guess, at the end. But it's already reforged. It makes sense. It makes sense when they first show it in the book. I think it's in the chapter Strider. Mm-hmm. And he has the broken sword in his hand. So it makes complete sense that that's the whole riddle, is that this is the guy with the broken sword, and one day all this will come to fruition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then Bilbo says it again when they're in Rivendell.
And he's like, I wrote that. I love that part.
So cute. Okay, and so then it cuts to Ahnna. Did you have any other thoughts about Arwen and Aragorn? No, you're like cool with that. I did think it was funny that it was like you have the gift of foresight, and I'm like, so many people in Middle Earth have the gift of foresight.
Really?
But I feel like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of like I just feel like everybody gets a little bit of foresight.
They mentioned that Denethor might even have it. It could just be everyone's misinterpreting his powers because he's using Palantir in secret.
Right.
But he says that he has the ability to see the future. Baragon says it in Minas Tirith.
I feel like there is like a Númenórean thing where you could probably a little bit.
Elrond and his brother's descendants would all kind of have the same powers.
I agree. So, and especially like in the Silmarillion, I feel like everybody's having prophecies and foresight all the time. So I just thought that was funny. I was like, yeah, but like everybody in Elrond's kind of class is just doing that. And I feel like Arwen probably does too. I don't know. It's fine. But
most likely because she would have it from her mother's side as well too, because Galadriel clearly has foresight. We've seen it happen several times.
Yeah, we're just like, all right, giving Elrond a special power, but it's not so special. But Elrond is special. Sorry, he's had a traumatic life. We love Elrond. So, then we cut to Pippin and Gandalf, riding into Minas Tirith, and basically everything that they talk about is cut. But we do learn a lot about what the Seeing Stones are, how many of them there were,
we got a whole history lesson on them. It's great. I love that.
I know, it's so good. And you know what? I'm probably because I didn't really fully read the Silmarillion until like a year or two ago, and I've just been surviving off of like wikis and stuff, and I knew who Feanor was, but didn't, in relation to Lord of the Rings, I never really thought about him. But when I was rereading this, Gandalf implies that, or theorizes that Feanor may have been the one that made the Palantiri, and I was like, oh shit, that's really fancy. That's really cool, because I mean, it's like they're in all these places where, related to the Númenóreans, more or less, and so I don't know. I was just thinking about that. Like, I wonder how they would have ended up with them.
So I don't know for sure, but I believe when Númenor was created, it was a gift to them, right, to the Númenóreans, because they all came to Middle Earth from Númenor when Isildur left, right before the end. The big thing being that there is an eighth and a master Palantir in Tirion that they can look back and see Valinor. That's right. The whole main papers for them. Gandalf even says it in this thing. He's like, I wondered if I could wrestle the mastery of the stone away from Sauron, so I could look to Tirion upon Tuna and see Valinor where they were created.
Yeah, I do love that. I think that we don't. I mean, there is the implication in Bag End with like Gandalf in the movies being like, no, like, why would you take the, like, don't tempt me, Frodo, But then and we see it again with Galadriel and the ring, but the temptation isn't just with the ring, it's from like all of these kind of relics in a way that are these powerful items, and Gandalf does talk about a desire to, similar to Pippin. Pippin really wanted to look at it. He couldn't stop thinking about it, but Gandalf knows that he can't, but he does mention a desire in his heart too. He's like, man, like if I were a dum-dum, I would take it and I would try to, see if I could get my, use my will against Sauron to turn it into something it's not. And that is something that I think they don't do it in the movies. In the movies he sees the White Tree and Minas Tirith and Sauron. But in the book, at the beginning, Pippin, when he first touches the Palantir, he sees like something that feels like far away, almost like he's seeing history, before it goes back, and Sauron is like, who's this? Who's got my stuff? Or first he like thinks it's Saruman because that's that's how they call each other. And then he's like, wait, who are you? And I think in the movie Pippin does say something along the lines of like he asked me my name, but I didn't tell him, and that he hurt me. But in the book, I feel like it implies more of like Pippin was trying to wrestle mentally with Sauron and like not giving him information, and ultimately Sauron doesn't really ask him for information because he's just so like excited.
He does say that he's a hobbit, and Sauron's like, "Oh yes, you are. Okay, I don't need any more information. Let me just I'll send a messenger. Tell Saruman to wait for me. I want my prize."
Yeah, he's like, I'm gonna pick you up and I'm gonna take you to Barad-dûr for my purposes. Very scary. And when Gandalf tells Pippin, like, yeah, he's coming for you, he's afraid. He's like, well, then don't meddle in the affairs of wizards, you goof. I just was like, wow, the idea of like Feanor making these, like, would they be as old as the Silmarils? It's just
I just realized that line that Gandalf says, Merry says earlier. He says that Gildor said, "Don't mess in the affair of wizards," and Gildor's going to see a Palantir at that time. I never realized the connection there. The next time it's mentioned is when Pippin's about to touch the Palantir. Definitely don't mess in the affair of wizards. And Gildor definitely has foresight as well.
Yeah. Whoa. That's wild. That's a crazy callback. I feel like Tolkien is always constantly referencing himself. Like, sometimes it's like literally a plot device or like a foreshadow, but then there are times where he'll just casually drop a name from like the Silmarillion, and it's just so funny to think about that because he knew that, or he didn't ever believe it would be published or that there would be anything to publish. I just think that's adorable. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna drop this in here. This makes sense. Like the layers upon layers of history that I'm building here.
Mm-hmm.
But it also just feels like a little Easter egg.
So I'm sorry I cut you off. So you're talking about when the Palantir would have been made. It has to have been during the years of the trees because it was made in Eldamar. If it was by Feanor, which we assume it is, he left before the end of the years of the trees. Mm-hmm. So it would have been during that time.
So I just wonder, I know nobody knows. At least I don't think anybody knows. But like, okay, so then who ended up with them? How did they make it through the years? Because it's like, obviously, they talk about the lost seeing stones, but then we find out that not too many of them are lost. Like, the Anuminas, Amansul,
those two are
somebody,
gone.
Yeah, but
those two are in the sea.
Right, doesn't the Greyhaven still has one?
The Tower Hills, Emyn Baraid. That's where Gildor and the elves are going to. That's the one that can see. It's the furthest west. It's the one that sees the one in Valinor.
So that one's still chilling. The one in Orthanc is obviously here. Yep. Denethor's got one. And then Sauron has the one from Minas Ithil, a.k.a. Minas Morgul.
Yep. And the Master Stone from Osgiliath is in the Anduin River, probably washed out to sea.
Right. So I'm like, honestly, we have like over half. I feel like that's pretty good. Obviously, nobody knew for sure if Sauron had one, and obviously Saruman kept his secret. Denethor keeps his secret, so they probably leaned into the idea of them being lost. But I'm just like, actually, we have a good chunk accounted for here, which we don't find out until all of this stuff unfolds. But it is interesting because Denethor references them later when they first meet him. So, I guess we should probably get over to Denethor. So, Ahnna, this is our first time in the movies meeting him. What is your first impression of Denethor?
He's a dick.
That's right.
Class is over. You got the answer. Any other thoughts? Just him as a dad or a leader?
I mean, I guess he's technically leading. Not a good dad. He obviously favors Boromir over Faramir, and that causes a little bit of strife for those characters. He's probably really insecure about, because he's not the true person that should be leading, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that causes him to just be fearful and bad.
Yeah. It's also interesting in this part of the book they mentioned that, like, Denethor clearly, is it Pippin that thinks that Denethor looks more like a wizard than Gandalf does?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, like, clear that the blood of Numenor is in him, and it also calls out, like, in Faramir, who we've met, but Pippin hasn't, but not Boromir.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, damn. Sorry,
you
bro.
wouldn't expect that at all. You expect Boromir to be, like, the most Numenorian out of all of them.
Right. I mean, he's older, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
How would it skip him? Then it calls into, obviously, like, there's science, but there's not science in Middle Earth. I'm just thinking of, so far as, like, to be Numenorian, like, of course there is a lineage thing, of course. But then I think there is almost, like, a personal ability to be more or less Numenorian. Like, say you have the lineage, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are, like, upholding that legacy, the same way that, like, Aragorn does, or Faramir does, people that, clearly value knowledge and learning as well as, like, physical abilities. They're kind of able to do it all, whereas, Boromir wasn't really interested in, like, being a wizard's pupil or whatever. It's just interesting because, Boromir, we've talked about that, like, he's not a bad guy, but he's clearly different from his brother.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as far as, like, what does it mean at this point to be a Numenorian?
So, like you said, science really doesn't match up because they mentioned that Prince Imrahil is very much like a high man, like of Numenorian descent. They say it in this chapter, and Imrahil's sister is Boromir's mother and Faramir's mother, Finduilas.
Mm-hmm.
So it has nothing to do with that. I think you made a good point where it's like can you carry, like, a trait? Is it something that you rise to as opposed to something being born with?
Mm-hmm.
They say that Boromir is very valiant, and so is Faramir, but he's also very a learned man. He's a master of lore, and he reads scrolls, just like Denethor did. Denethor was very valiant in his youth, carried the Horn of Gondor, but he's also a master of scrolls and lore. He tells Gandalf in Shadow of the Past and Fellowship that, like, I read all of these. You're not going to find anything I don't know in here. So maybe it's something like that, where it's like, if you value strength over wisdom, that's kind of where, like, the Numenorian sense comes from. Whereas, like, the Numenorians come from strong men of history, so it's like, if you lose the history, do you lose their essence? Maybe something like that.
Could be. I mean, it kind of feels like it, because otherwise Boromir should be just as Numenorian as his brother. I don't know. Something to think about. So we have Gandalf and Denethor kind of showing down in this chapter of Minas Tirith. In the movie, it's significantly reduced, which makes me sad because we probably get, like, the best sassy Gandalf lines from this part.
Oh yeah.
It, like, really, and it's like Pippin is watching them, and he's talking about, he could see, like, a line between them, almost, like, smoldering. Like, they are literally they're both so strong, and they both have a lot of abilities. They're both very smart and wise and all of that, but it's just like seeing them go toe to toe. That, and Pippin is starting to realize kind of what Mary was saying earlier, like about what it is that makes Gandalf different. Because he thought Denethor looked older, but you could tell that Gandalf has more je ne sais quoi, like he's more majestic in a way. And so Denethor, he's pretty rude to Pippin, but Pippin being, I think that there's a pretty common thing where whenever you say something rude to one of our dear hobbits, they are like, they like puff themselves up and are like, excuse me. And so that is when, Pippin kind of like swears himself to Denethor. And it hasn't happened in the movie yet, which I was like, dang, they moved that? So they moved this later to when Faramir is going off on his like suicide mission. And, so he gets Pippin to tell him all the things, but not all the things. Pippin doesn't mess up too bad. He tells him more or less about, because he wants to hear about Boromir's death. And there is a part at the end, towards the end of their conversation, where Denethor's like, pride would be folly that disdained help and counsel at need, like referring to Gandalf coming to help. But you deal out such gifts according to your own designs. Yet the Lord of Gondor is not to be made the fool of other men's purposes, however worthy. And to him there is no purpose higher in the world as it now stands than the good of Gondor. And the rule of Gondor, my lord, is mine and no other man's, unless the king should come again. And Gandalf is like, oh, unless the king should come again? Well, my lord steward, it is your task to keep some kingdom still against that event which few now look to see. In that task you shall have all the aid that you are pleased to ask for. But I will say this, the rule of no realm is mine, neither of Gondor nor any other, great or small. But all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, those are my care. And for my part, I shall now wholly fail of my task, though Gondor should perish. Wait, he says, and for my part, I shall not wholly fail of my task, though Gondor should perish, if anything passes through this night that can still grow fair or bear fruit and flower again in days to come. For I also am a steward. Did you not know? A hair whip. A hair flip at the end of it. And that's the end of the conversation. He leaves at that point. Like, he's like, ugh, so, like, ugh, idiot. But in the movie, they have Denethor, like, know about Aragorn. Like, he knows who Aragorn is, and he's like, oh, I will not have some ranger from the north, like, the rule of Gondor is mine, blah, blah, blah. And Gandalf is just like, you're dumb. And he says he would use his grief as a cloak, but he says that to Denethor's face in the book, which I thought was funny. But I'm like, dang it! They keep taking so many excellent lines away from Ian McKellen. And I live for I also am a steward, did you not know? Hair flip. Oh, man.
It's so good. He would have been such a great sassy Gandalf. And we get that in the behind-the-scenes stuff. He's very sassy in all of the behind-the-scenes stuff. It would have been perfect. All of the awesome lines that you've talked about on your podcast, and including this one, he would have delivered to perfection. It would have been amazing.
Mm-hmm. He's so good at his job. If this podcast ever blows up, all that I hope that comes of it, I don't need like 1 million followers, and I don't need like a bunch of sponsorships. All that I want is for the rest of the cast, the surviving cast of Lord of the Rings, just make an audiobook. Just read it. Read it to me. Mm-hmm. Please. Because it would be so good. And really, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I don't know how. You obviously couldn't probably fit all of this into that scene. It's pretty quick. But maybe not have Denethor know who Aragorn is. Not really sure how everybody keeps figuring out who Aragorn is in the movie. Because he doesn't ever... He he doesn't even want to be king at this point, as far as we know in the movie. How do they know who he is?
Well, they do
Does that
mention
make
in the
sense?
chapter that like Denethor is able to figure out that there is some guy in the
Mm-hmm.
Fellowship. There's somebody led the Fellowship after Moria, and it wasn't
Right.
Boromir. So
Right.
there's definitely some, and he has a famous sword, so he's able to perceive it from that. I guess they just like, oh, it's a little nod to that. Denethor just read their minds then and there during the conversation, as opposed to the hour-long conversation where he's just probing Pippin the entire time, like we get
Mm-hmm.
in the book.
Yeah, that's true. I just don't know how movie Denethor seems to know anything about Aragorn.
Magic.
Yeah, apparently he's using the I don't because they also make it seem like Saruman knows who everybody seems to know who Aragorn is, and it's like I thought you grew up in secret.
They,
Guess
they,
not.
they do seem to make like this. There's this line in it where when Denethor says Palantir, like Pippin feels a glance come off of his eye to him. Is it him
Mm,
like? Is he saying like, "Oh, I know about Palantirs because I have one," or is it I've seen Pippin because when he touched it, I was able to see it. So maybe it really
mm,
is getting way more information than we even suspect from the book.
mm. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Like, was I would have loved to. Obviously, we can't love to ask Tolkien like the mechanics of how the Palantiri work because it's like could so if Sauron, this is my plant. That my mic is my Palantir now, and he's just like, okay, I'm trying to be like, Saruman, why aren't you answering my calls? And then Pippin picks it up, and at that point, if Denethor also is like, I'm bored, I'm gonna try to see what's going on with this thing. Does he just like see that conversation happen? Does he get a glimpse of it? Maybe.
So we know that Aragorn can bend it to his will. He's the most
Yeah.
worthy to wield the Palantir. So technically, you would assume it's probably Denethor next that has that kind
Mhm.
of authority because he's of Numenorean descent,
Mhm.
and he's very powerful. Like Pippin says, you can tell he's very wise and very strong. Uh,
Mhm.
Maybe a few other characters could possibly do it. Gandalf probably could in the same way that Sauron can, where he's
Yeah.
clearly strong enough to use it, but just not at his will.
And I also think it's significant that Gandalf get like after he realizes that Pippin is a monster and cannot be stopped. Yeah, like he's like, okay, Aragorn, you take the Seeing Stone, and he kind of like he like does a little bow and like bequeaths it to Aragorn. And Aragorn's like, all right, I'll take this. And he's like, well, be careful, like don't really don't use it until it's time. And he's like, don't worry, I won't. And they will give a nod to that moment in the movie at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But and we'll see that later too when Aragorn like actually decides to use it. But I thought that was cool that it was like it's kind of his. They kind of make a note about like it kind of belongs to you, Aragorn, if you go through like who owned it before, like it being related to Elendil. So it's like kind of your thing. You can hold it, and so he does. And so we'll see that later. It's always weird to me that it. I guess we'll see, but I know that in the movie scene it like breaks into a billion pieces, or is that just his like he drops it?
I think it's the Evan Star, the
The
Even
Evan
Star,
Star
the
breaks.
necklace, and it
Yeah.
shatters on the floor because he
Okay.
shows in the Palantir. I think he sees Arwen like dying.
Oh yeah. I couldn't remember if like everything just broke in that scene. Um, but we can talk about more when we get there. So, really the final thing is well, okay, there's two last notes that I had. So when Pippin is swearing to serve Denethor, and in the movie this happens later, but he does like the full swearing happens later, but Pippin does like offer himself up. Ahnna, did you have any thoughts about what Gandalf's reaction to that in the movie?
Well, it kind of goes back to like how they are underestimating the hobbits the entire time. Um, they're like silly Pippin. He made the mistake when they're in the caves and he knocks
Mm-hmm.
dead body, you know. And they do this over and over and over to him. So it's like one of those instances where they're like, "Oh my God, Pippin, why are you talking? Why are you volunteering yourself for the service of this dude that you just met 5 seconds ago because you feel bad about Boromir?" I don't know. It's
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pippin, like Gandalf is like he bows and then Gandalf is like, "Oh, get up," you know. But what I love is that I mean the movies love Gandalf picking on Pippin. They love it, and then will never stop. But we've talked about a few times where Gandalf will back up what Pippin does, but in the book he doesn't really say anything, and he's like, "Okay, now offer him your sword if you mean it." That's all he says. Like if you're serious about this, you have to do this now. And but in the book afterwards, you know, Pippin is like, "Are you mad?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "You did a good job. You know, you spoke well." He's like, "I do not know what put it in your head or your heart to do that, but it was well done. I did not hinder it, for generous deeds should not be checked by cold counsel." And mentions that Denethor's heart was, he could tell that Denethor was like seriously touched by Pippin's offer. So, you know, I just love that it's like there's so many times where Pippin, he literally, I mean, is the definition of follow your heart, you know, like really impulsive decisions, like even the whole thing with the brooch, like leaving it when they're with the Uruk-hai, and you know, pretending to be Gollum. And there's things that he does that are, you know, kind of brave, but it's also just like he just feels compelled to do these things, but he probably couldn't even tell you why. And I really love that Gandalf is like, "You know what? I don't know how that came to your brain, but it really worked out, because now you'll be able, when you're not like on duty, you'll have basically leave to explore the whole city," which later turns out to be really helpful for Pippin. So I thought that was cute. And then finally, we also meet Baragond. And is that how we say it? Is that how we say his name?
That's how I've always said it. Baragond.
Okay. And I can't remember his son's name because I didn't write it down. Burgil. Yeah. So we meet Baragond, who's one of, you know, another member of the military, and he kind of teaches Pippin the passwords and shows him around a little bit. They talk a lot, and he's like, "I don't think you're going to be working with me specifically, but like I don't have duty, so I'm here to hang out." And then he sends Pippin to meet his son later, which I thought was a really cool interaction. It was like the happiest Pippin had been since he left Merry, which I think is hilarious because he's hanging out with a 10-year-old. And
who's
Pippin
a foot taller than him.
Yeah, and he's like 29. It's just so funny. But they have a real good time, and like I understand cutting these characters. Like there's no time really for this, but this was when I was reading that part, I was like, okay, this is TV show material. Like letting Pippin go off and while Gandalf is dealing with bigger shit. And I also love that Shadowfax, like Gandalf is very concerned about Shadowfax during this time. He's like, "Pippin, be sure to go check on him, make sure that he's got what he needs." And Shadowfax is like just as sassy as Gandalf. Like he's basically like ready for a race, even though he's just like ran from Isengard to Minas Tirith, which is hundreds of miles. And Pippin's like, "Well, I hope you've had a good rest." And he like later he brings him treats after dinner. And I'm just like, this is so cute. And, you know, Shadowfax is a character in the movies, and he's a beautiful horse. But I love that he, like, stomps his feet, and he's just like, "Oh, I'm so bored. Like, I need to be out doing things." And I'm just like, that is the perfect horse for Gandalf. Because he does his own thing and helps Gandalf out when he wants. And, you know, I mean, there's really no way to put that in the movie. I just thought it was adorable that Pippin was still giving treats to the pony. And he was, and it says that Shadowfax is like appreciative of the snacks, even though his manger was full. And I'm like, who doesn't love a good treat? Who doesn't love a good treat? Shadowfax is all of us. But the things, there are a couple of things that do survive from Baragon that they give to Gandalf in the movies. The line, so, Pippin is talking about how, they rush to get there and then everything is kind of like slowed down now that they're actually in the city. And Baragon said, "It is but the deep breath before the plunge." And it switches to Gandalf and it becomes, "It's the deep breath before the plunge," like when Pippin is talking about how quiet everything is. And also the line, "Here will the hammer stroke fall hardest," when Baragon is talking about how much Sauron hates Gondor. He's like, "Well, we're lucky," joking. Like, Sauron hates our guts, so here will the hammer stroke fall hardest. And it becomes, "Here the hammer stroke will fall the hardest," when Gandalf is kind of explaining what's going on to Pippin. And I do like that they take that opportunity between Gandalf and Pippin to like explain a little bit more about the history of the White Tree. Not a lot, but kind of give you a little bit more context for what we're seeing now. But then this line, the "Here the hammer stroke will fall the hardest," is combined with, "This will be the end of Gondor as we know it." And when he said that in the movie, I was like, I've heard this before. I read this before. Where was this? That was taken from when Gandalf rides up, first enters like the realm of Gondor, or like the outskirts. He's speaking with the men at the gate of Minas Tirith, and he says, "Whatever betide, you have come to the end of Gondor that you have known. Let me pass." He's like, "Let me in. I got shit to do." And so they're like, "Okay, Mithrandir, that's cool." So that's like the men of Minas Tirith at the gate there, and they're just like, "Yep, go on in." But I thought that was some nice nods to some actual dialogue that they got to keep, even though it wasn't. It's kind of like in different places and by different people.
Mm-hmm.
But I like it when they're able to do that kind of stuff. So some of those lines aren't actually Gandalf's, but I could see they do feel right coming from Gandalf in that situation.
Yeah, it also gives Gandalf that kind of chance to comfort Pippin a little bit, which he kind of does after the whole swearing an oath of fealty to Denethor, where he's like, "Everything's fine, you did great." Which is, and it's repurposed very well because I love those Baragon lines. But I liked in the book when Baragon says those, it's Pippin comforting him, being like, we can still fight, we can still stand and fight. And Baragon's like, "Yes, you know what, you're right. We'll make it through this." And it's another thing that they do take from Pippin. He's so much more than just the comedic relief and Gandalf's whipping boy.
Yeah, exactly. Pippin is, they're all the hobbits are really great characters, and I love that we do get to see so much more from their perspective in the books, because typically when Tolkien is writing, there's one point where we see from Aragorn and his perspective for a little bit, but if a hobbit is around, that is most likely who you're going to be viewing the scene from, like whose perspective you'll be viewing the scene from. So we get to see a lot more about like what Pippin is thinking, and we're going to see more and more about what Merry is thinking now that he's separated from Pippin. And it pretty much, sometimes we have Frodo's perspective, but oftentimes it's just Frodo and Sam, it's just Sam. It's usually the person who has the least amount of knowledge about the situation going on, which I think is a really cool use of perspective in this instance, because there is so much going on, and then to put it in terms of just like the hobbits are like us. They're like the stand-in for the audience in a lot of ways. So I like the use of that, and seeing and getting to learn more about who Merry and Pippin and Sam and Frodo are in the books through that process. So are there any other thoughts that we had about this section of movie or book?
So there's one part that we skipped over. On their way to Minas Tirith from I believe it's Edoras. They don't mention it by name, but they describe a small town that kind of screams Edoras. They see the beacons of Gondor being lit.
Oh yeah, I love that part.
and something when I was a kid and watching it now, it's like you see the scenes in the Return of the King where it's getting lit, and you're like, who is up there on this mountaintop? And they actually describe it in the book. Gandalf says that there's posts at all of these things that are kept, so they light it, and then they'll send out riders. They see riders pass them as they're going along their way, and also why they were lit is different in the book. In the book, Pippin lights it. Gandalf wants them to light it so Rohan will come, but they actually light it to send word to Rohan and south because they know that the Corsairs of Umbar are coming, and it's a nice little foreshadowing to a lot of what's going to happen in the next few chapters. There's way more at stake than just let's make sure Theoden comes. Theoden's already going to come regardless of whether or not the beacons were lit.
Right. Yeah, and we see also in this chapter when Pippin is with Burgil, that a bunch of men from south of Gondor, including Prince Imrahil, and what's his name? They call him the Fat, which I was like,
Furlong.
Yes,
Furlong.
The Fat.
What a Lawsonarch.
Yes, and he shows up, and Tolkien counts it up, and it's less than 3,000, and people are like, it's kind of like the less than we would have hoped kind of moment, but it's a game. It's not no people, so we're happy. Or it's better than nothing, so we'll take it. So these are some more characters that we'll, particularly Imrahil, that we'll see later on in the book. But there's I guess there is kind of a thing in the movies where it kind of restricts whole countries to just a town. You know, I mean, Rohan is lucky they get Helm's Deep and they get Edoras, but Gondor is really represented by Minas Tirith. But there is this whole, area to the south which is about to be attacked first, and so everybody's kind of lamenting, like, dang, we could have had more help here if they didn't have a problem. But at least now they are a little bit relieved that they hadn't dealt with the Saruman, because then they would have been trapped in a net, I think is how they put it. But there's also a moment where they talk about, I think in the movie, they pretty much, everywhere we go, the women and children just are kind of like trapped there with our heroes, which I get. There isn't really time to explain, like, well, we sent them away. But Pippin does notice that, like, the road is super busy, and they're sending, like, all these wagons of people, and it's, like, the elderly, the children, the women to the south, so that they're kind of out of the line of fire, because they know that Sauron are coming, and, they don't want to be under siege and have everybody, obviously, and it's a supply issue, like, if you're expecting to be under siege, you won't be able to feed everybody for as long as you could if you had less people. So, if this were, like, I feel like you see it in some movies and, like, war things where it's like, then you have people attacking the civilians. I'm kind of surprised that Sauron didn't just, like, have a Nazgul bomb the road for these people. But we're glad he didn't. He isn't. It's almost like he's not that bad. He's not like human level bad. The things that we do to ourselves are worse.
He needs people that he can control when he's the Dark Lord of the entire world. He still wants minions and slaves.
True. Yeah, he's like, I'll take them. I'll take the old and the ladies and the kids. Yeah. So they go south, but later we'll learn kind of more about what's going on there. Even though it is mentioned here, like, there is already news that something's about to go down that way too. So, and there is a point where, is it Burgond that talks about how there's a line that somebody says about how basically, like, everywhere is under attack. Like, there's Mirkwood is mentioned.
It's Baragond, that's right. Yeah. Right before he says that he's going to hit us the hardest. He said, he's talking about the Sea of Rune, and Mirkwood and beyond are getting attacked as well. That's not just here.
Yeah. So, I think that's another thing that happens in, like, people just watch the movies and they'll be like, well, where the heck is all the other people, like, that we met in The Hobbit? And it's like, well, they're all dealing with stuff too, Like, later we'll find out all the problems going on with, like, Dale and at Erebor with Gimli's family, Mirkwood, obviously. Elrond, I mean, it's like stuff with Elrond. It's like that's not a place of war. That's like a refuge. There's no army of elves that you really could send at this point. So, but movies tell us different, a little bit, with Helm's Deep. But apparently, all those elves die. Hashtag sad. So I guess that puts us at and it was kind of interesting stopping the movie at this point, because when Gandalf is talking to Pippin, it starts to intercut with Gandalf and Pippin and Frodo, Sam, and Gollum approaching Cirith Ungol, and I was like, nope, we're not to that chapter yet. So I just had to stop it, and I couldn't let them finish their conversation. But I know that in the beginning of this next part of the movie, Gandalf is going to be explaining the Witch King a little bit, so maybe we can go into who the Witch King is a little bit more next time.
Very exciting.
Yeah, Witch King stuff is good stuff. I still fully believe that he deserves a spin-off series. Like, I feel like
I'm sure he'll get one too. Absolutely.
I feel like there are so many tendencies nowadays where, like, a lot of studios just won't let their bad guys just be bad guys. But I just want one where the Witch King is just be a bad guy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I don't need to know.
Witch King's story is epic. He gets to fight some serious characters from the Legendarium that cannot beat him, and you just see how powerful this guy is.
I know. And he's not even the big bad. Mm-hmm. He's just number one lieutenant or something. So it's just like, I think in Lord of the Rings, a lot of it, I mean, we are going to see some legit war happen soon. But there are a lot of things where everything is kind of scary, but not necessarily because you're seeing them be scary. If you know what I mean. Like, they are, but it's like mostly like everyone just knows that they're the worst and also the best at being the worst. So they know to be afraid before they are maybe necessarily given a reason to be afraid, which is kind of like, when the hobbits first see the Black Riders, like, they start to feel the power of the ring wraiths so far as, like, the fear that they can induce, but they haven't necessarily done anything, in the Shire. Like, they didn't, like, murder anybody. I mean, they scare some people, act like they're going to run some people over with their horses, but, it's not like they, like, witness something, but they just know that, like, that's a bad dude. Mm-hmm. But I think it would be interesting. Yeah, I think insofar as, like, making a show about them, I think it would be interesting to just see them, like, go for it. Like, do the thing that you've been rumored to do, like, being the worst. That's kind of why I'm excited to get to the Eowyn parts as well. Because when Witch King enters the fray, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's the story that got me into this.
Yes!
It's so incredible. It gets me every single time.
That's so cool. So when, your friend was just like, hey, have you heard about Eowyn? Did they just, like, tell you the story, like, from memory, and then were like, you should read these books? Or were they like, hey, just read this chapter?
Wow.
Oh, it was like story time, like when you think of, like, word of mouth tales of these fantastic worlds and fairy stories. That's how he presented it to me. He's, like, middle of the night telling me these stories with, like, super high enthusiasm. Just
That's
how
awesome.
Like, and he really accentuated how powerful the Witch King was, and that there was no hope in this, and, like, the whole speech. Oh my god, it's so good.
Truly, can't wait. Yeah, I think that is one thing that I feel like Tolkien would really approve of, insofar as the sharing, the way, going about sharing the stories in these ways, just being so excited about it and sharing that enthusiasm, and kind of continuing that oral tradition that so many of probably his favorite fairy stories were based in. And then somebody finally came along and wrote it down, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the thing about being a mythology, like to be a true mythology, it's not, it's like a story that everybody knows, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always like told the same way or is always interpreted the same way. I think that's when you get, like when you think about Greek mythology or whatever, there's so many different stories just using the same characters to, kind of
Mm-hmm.
tell these morality tale, or just tell these like crazy stories that happened. And I think, and that's why I love that some of the things in Lord of the Rings is like unexplained. Like there are just some things that we're never gonna know because he just didn't go there, and I think that that's fine, because I think you're allowed to fill in the gaps. I think of all the fandoms, I think headcanon should be the most encouraged with something like Tolkien. Like, just adding to it in your own way.
Mm-hmm. We started playing the Dungeons and Dragons set in the First Age of Middle Earth, and the fact that there's so much history to call upon and there's so much story in depth, it makes it so easy to like create headcanons and kind of fan fictions, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so grounded and there's so much depth that it leaves so much room. Like he wrote in his letter, the very famous one, "Other hands and minds to sculpt," and
Yeah.
there's such a great foundation that if if even if just Lord of the Rings was the last book that came out, he has so many hidden details in the story that we could have written our own Silmarillion with, like, oh, this is what he meant here. This is
Mm-hmm.
this is who Feanor is. We get little snippets in the book about the Silmarils and the appendices and stuff, but we could create stories out of how much he leaves, how much wiggle room he leaves for the reader.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I love. That I've like grown in appreciation. It's regarding like the poems and songs that are used, because they add this whole other layer, and often they're referencing events that are never really told in full in Lord of the Rings. They're referencing like Silmarillion stuff, and that he all had in his brain, but he was like, okay, this makes sense to use here, to add some depth to the story. But there, for decades, right, there was no Silmarillion to go be like, okay, what the heck are they talking about? So I just love the idea of like somebody reading that and just like the wonder that can instill, because it doesn't give you all the answers, but it adds a layer of depth at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Tell me the necessity of the Nimrodel song that Legolas sings as they're entering Lothlorien for the story itself. It has no relevance in the entire story. But what does it leave you with? It leaves you with this. There's so much history here
Mm-hmm.
that even the characters are like, well, I wonder what this is even about. It's beautiful, but I have no clue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, with like having the hobbits be kind of like the stand-in for the reader, that, and also the fact that like hobbits, we know they like they like lore to an extent, right? Like usually it has to have something to do with like their family or
Mm-hmm.
pipeweed or ale, something that they have like a tangible reference to. So for them to like be in the room when Legolas or anybody just kind of like bursts into song because they're more learned in like the history of the world, and they're just kind of moved by being in these historic places. I think that feeling of like awe and wonder that should instill, and the hobbits should also probably be instilled in the reader a little bit, as far as like, wow, like there's the story that we have, but then there is so much else going on that we're not necessarily going to get to explore in these books, but it's fun for us to think about. And I think that's one of the things where like for my personal Tolkien journey, I literally was able to survive off of because I clearly wasn't ready for the Silmarillion for a long time, because I kept picking it up, and I even like picked up the Children of Hurin, and then I was like, shit, I don't know who these people are. And with the Silmarillion, it was just, I am a narrative girl, and it wasn't really doing that. It's very textbooky, and so, but just like that sense of awe and like history just within these books, and then with the addition of the appendices, I was kind of able to just like survive off of that, if you want to put it like that. Just being able to absorb and like rethink about it until like I was older, and had some time to be like, what, I want to get into the bottom of this a little bit more. I want to know more about that history or that story, and why is it significant at this point for that character. Not necessary, and you certainly don't have to want that, or there's no like fan requirement to have to dig into it, but I just love that it's there. There's always just like, whenever you're ready for it, there's some more that you could dive into or think about or explore.
And for me, the Silmarillion is my favorite book for that exact reason. I wanted to know what all of these references were, and I became obsessed with that book. I've read that more than any other Tolkien book. And I'm still not satisfied. That's why I'm so excited about the Rings of Power, is that they're going to tell us stories that we've never heard before. I want to know about the dwarves of the Second Age, because we don't get much other than like the Doors of Moria and the building of the Dor Durin with Celebrimbor and Narvi.
Right. Everything has been told in relation to how it is with elves, Like, the Silmarillion is very elf-centric. Like, the dwarves are around, but they're not... Like, there's very much, like, a vibe of, like, elf prejudice in that book, when the dwarves are concerned. So I think that that will be super interesting. I think that there's a lot of things that they can do with that show that could be really exciting, or just interesting to think about, insofar as like filling in the gaps, and like helping us get from A to B in a sense. So I'm excited. I think that will be fun. It'll be interesting as far as like digesting that show in a different way, right? Because I think that that's one thing that like trips people up, is that like this, not easy to adapt. Tolkien thought it would be impossible, right? But there's a clear narrative. It may not be super linear, and there's a lot going on, but there is a clear narrative, and with something like the Rings of Power, we're dealing with outlines and sketches of things that happened, and we're dealing with a more, textbooky, like dry kind of descriptions of things. And so I think it'll be cool to see them add color to it, and in what ways that they take it, because there are things that I agree and disagree with on probably like every Tolkien adaptation, and I'm sure that this one will be no different. But it seems like all signs point to it's going to be a good time in some way, shape, or form.
I'm so excited for this. I am, regardless of how much like lore breaking stuff there is that people keep saying, "Oh, it's ruining the story." It's whatever. Like you said, there's nothing really to pull from. I can't name you 3 lines of dialogue from the Second Age.
No.
Other than like the Rings poem, that happened in the Second Age technically. So I'm so excited for this, regardless of what they do. It's going to be back in Middle Earth, and we're going to see these characters that we love from the movies, Lord of the Rings. We're going to see Galadriel and Elrond. We're going to actually see more of Isildur and Elendil and Sauron. I mean, come on.
I hope that Sauron is the coolest. I want to love him and hate him at the same time, I feel like he is the character that I really want a lot from insofar as like emotional impact, you know? Like, I want it to hurt when he betrays Celebrimbor. Like, you know, I want it to be like this whole... I want them to surprise me a little bit, because I know that they haven't said shit about who Sauron is or how he's gonna... They haven't said anything about Anatar. Like, I don't know how they're gonna do it. But I hope I'm surprised. I hope it's a really fun ride, you know? I'm interested to see how they use Galadriel in a more, you know, like, physical way. You know, she's gonna be, like, it's clearly she's gonna be more of, like, a main character in the story. She's gonna be, like, a mover and shaker of things, you know? Why else would they be, like, playing her up so much in the promos and, like, showing her on this, like, ice hit, like, cliff thing, you know? I'm really excited to see more of her. I mean, it's really going to be cool to see what they do with the dwarves, because there is, like, in the Silmarillion, we know that they're so good at everything they do, like, craft-wise. I think that there's so much they can explore as far as, like, how beautiful they can make Khazad-dûm. You know, there's only, like, a little, like, isn't this nice? And, you know, the Fellowship where Gandalf risks a little light and it's still in the dark. So I want to kind of capture that moment of, like, wow, this place was something, and then show us what that something was, you know?
The greatest of all the dwarven kingdoms, which is saying a lot, and we're going to see it in its full glory. So think about the first age is that the dwarves are all separated.
Mm-hmm.
All the dwarves that survived the first age go to Khazad-dûm and make it even better. All these great smiths and craftsmen we've heard of from the Silmarillion that survived went there, and their lineage went on and even increased the greatness of the city. I'm so happy that they really haven't shown much of the cities yet, because I want to be blown away. Like when you finally get into Minas Tirith after seeing like little snips in the first and second movie, when you're finally in, it just completely floors you. I'm excited for that with all of Numenor and Khazad-dûm and Lindon and Eregion and Ost-Nethel. And even these like made up places they're doing where it's like far away, Tir Harad or whatever it's called. I want to see Middle Earth.
Yeah, I really want them to go off of that too, because there's so many nods to like how amazing the craftsmanship of like even the Numenorians, like how was Orthanc built? How was the Argonath built? You know, like these things that have stood the test of time, like even the Morannon, right? Like the Black Gate, that's technically, you know, the Numenorian thing, you know, the city of Minas Ithil, which is now Minas Morgul. Just these things that have, because the Middle Earth we know is on its kind of last leg before our Fellowship shakes it up, you know?
Yeah.
Like, things aren't what they once were. And so this is going to be like, this is the we were referring to that whole
like,
time.
All of those ruins that you see in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they're not ruins in the Second Age. They might not even be built yet by the time the story starts. It's going to be very exciting to see. Yeah,
I want them to explore that, like how people doing things different, you know? What was it like, you know? I think that was one thing that I always liked in Harry Potter, for example, when I didn't care, like, I mean, obviously I was in it for Harry's journey, but the things that I really liked was when they were just like in class, you know, and like the funny things that they would learn, or just like the lived in nature of things. So I hope that's kind of the vibe, you know, of like getting to know these people in the first season, getting to see them, you know, kind of really come into their own before we head into like the whole storyline of like Sauron screwing things up.
The fact that they announced that Sauron really isn't going to be in the first season really makes it positive that it's going to be a lived-in story. We're getting a full season of like, welcome, get ready, because we have 4 more seasons planned, and it's going to be freaking epic. Remember that 10-minute prologue at the beginning of Fellowship? We're going to expand on that a lot, and we're going to spend $1 billion doing it.
Truly.
I'm ready.
Okay,
Yeah.
Amazon.
2 more months to the
I know.
day. 2 more months.
Wow! You're right. That's crazy. That won't be true for when you're listening to this, but crazy!
Mm-hmm. So by the time you listen to this, it'll be even closer.
Even
Ooh.
closer.
Ha ha ha.
Wow, that's exciting. I still want us to do like an after show, like maybe the next day, if we can
I don't
wrestle
think
people.
it's possible that we won't do that.
Right?
Even
I
if
just
it's
have
just
to.
us talking like this and recording it and putting it out.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be anything like fleshed out or really researched. I just think it'll be fun to talk about, and people can listen or not. I think we have really covered these chapters fairly well, and then some.
Mm-hmm.
So Tim, please, thank you so much for joining us. This has been super fun. I think you're coming back again for more Gondor stuff, right?
Yes. I think I'll be here for some very merry driven chapters, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I got Pippin and let's do merry.
Yeah, so that'll be awesome. We can't wait to have you back. And then, do you want to remind people where they can find you on the interwebs?
You can find me at Glamdring Fohammer on TikTok. And from there, you can find various links and stuff, mainly to the Discord that we're all a part of, that you've mentioned several times on the show. Many of your guests are a part of or created it. That's where you can find me. That's the main place. I'll answer there before TikTok. So
Yeah.
if you're not following or not a member of that Discord yet, you're missing out. Come join in and talk some Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, lots of other stuff with us.
Yeah, it's definitely like the coolest kids in the Tolkien fandom on that Discord. Am I saying too much? I don't know.
No, I don't disagree. That's for sure.
It feels right. So, thank you again so much for listening in on this episode. We'll be back with more Spooky Nazgul next time. And Ahnna, I can tell you're excited. I think, are the Nazguls your favorite as far as our villains so far?
I just like them so much. They're so creepy. I'm just down with any spooky, creepy thing. I gravitated towards the most, and
we're about to see their house, so
love it.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. So join us next time. Find us on Discord, and we will see you later.